going to have a look at number 4 even. Goodness, I've completely forgotten what I'm doing. So the 4th option, so this is the bifold option. Just pulling my threads through. And we're going to start with one of our pieces that's got that shaped part at the top. And we're going to add one of our lining panels. Now I haven't interfaced this, and I'm going to add that lining panel to the top, right sides together. I'm just going to put a couple of clips in. I would if I could remove my rulers. I'm just going to pop a couple of clips across there to hold that in place. You need to make sure that the sides match up perfectly. So you can see that's right sides together, and on the back you can see that there's just a couple of little corners of the lining fabric showing at the top there where we shaped that top part. Now I'm going to stitch across here using a 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. Couple of back stitches at the beginning just to secure my stitching. I appear not to have put my knee lift on my machine. I'm just going to grab that because it feels very weird not having it. Right, there we go. So I've secured that with a line of stitching across the top. Now I'm going to just trim away the faux leather on the back down to about 1/8 of an inch. It's just to get rid of any bulk in that top seam. Then I'm going to open that up. I'm going to finger press it, and I'm going to turn that so that the lining is wrong sides together with the exterior panel. And I'm just going to kind of finger press it, making sure that that seam is properly on the top there. You don't want any of the lining showing on the front. And so there we go. Now the lining is on the back, and you can't see any of the lining from the front. And I'm going to top stitch at the top there using an 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. I'm just starting an 1/8 of an inch in from the edge. In fact, I'm not. I'm going to start, apologies, I'm starting a 1/4 of an inch in from the edge. I forget my own pattern sometimes. I'm going to do one back stitch. And then I'm going to top stitch across the top of that panel. And I'm going to finish my top stitching a 1/4 of an inch away from the other edge. Again with one back stitch just to secure my threads. I'm going to get rid of any spare threads. I hope you can see that. Let me just turn this light on a bit better so you might be able to see. So you can see there's the stitching across the top. And that's all hunky-dory. Now my lining is on the back. Now I'm just going to pull my lining out because I'm going to take my... what I haven't done is I haven't top stitched my card slots. So I'm just going to quickly top stitch all my card slots because I haven't done that. You can either top stitch like this, or you using a back stitch at the beginning and the end, or you can bury your threads. It's very much up to you. This is a very quick project, so I didn't want to make it longer by burying stitches, but it is very much your call. If you want it to look really posh, then bury your stitches. One, two, three, so we're going to take our back card slot once we've done all of the top stitching. So we've pulled that lining piece out, and we're going to, you can make a mark, or if you've got very patterned faux leather like I have, you might find that making a mark actually doesn't show. But we're going to make that line 3/4 of an inch from the bottom edge. Oh no, it does show. I wasn't sure if it would or not. And we're going to lay our first card slot, the back card slot, onto that marked line in the same way as we have with all of the others. So you can see there's an awful lot of repetition again. And the top right hand corner of your card slot will be 1/8 of an inch away from the very top edge of your back panel. If I just hold that up, it's difficult to see because this is quite patterned, but I promise you there's an 1/8 of an inch there, just a little tiny gap. Make sure you keep that back panel out of the way, otherwise you'll be stitching your lining to your card slots. So, and I'm just going to stitch across the bottom here of this card slot using 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. Then I'm going to take my second card slot, I've got threads here that just need to be got rid of, and my ruler again, and I'm going to make a line, mark a line on here that is actually now 1/4 of an inch away from the bottom edge. Difficult to see, but it is there. And I'm going to position my second card slot above that 1/4 inch mark, matching the sides. It's really important that you match the sides up. These little tabs on the sides need to, little tabs on the sides need to match with the edge of your main panel. Now, if they're a little bit longer, don't panic, you can trim that off. Actually, I've got a little bit of overhang there, so I clearly didn't cut nearly as well as I should have done. And it is literally a fraction, and don't worry about that. You can trim that off, it's not the end of the world. And then I'm going to stitch across the bottom of that cardstock to secure it using 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. Now, whilst you're not going to be stitching this on just yet, I like to just pin that or clip that the first front card slot onto the front so that I know I've got it. It's really easy with all of these card slots to get very confused about which one's which. So the front card slot, I just clip it on so that I know where it is and I know that I've got it there. You don't have to if you don't want to. I'm just always wary that I've got a bit of thread there that needs to come out. Wary that I'm going to lose it, so I'm going to just clip that together. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to do exactly the same thing with the other side. So I'm just going to repeat the same thing. So I'm just going to do my top stitching on my card slots because I haven't done it for this side either. Here that I've run out of bobbin thread. No, I haven't. I just haven't pulled it through. Let's try it again, shall we? So top stitching my card slots of 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. Trimming off any thread ends. 1, 2, 3. And we're going to do exactly the same as we did last time. So we're just going to pop our lining right sides together with the top angled edge of our back piece. And we're going to clip that in place just to be sure that it's exactly where we want it. And we're going to top stitch across the top to secure it using a 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. Trim away the excess faux leather there. Finger press the lining away from the faux leather and then fold the faux leather so that the seam is sitting right on the top there. None of the lining needs to be showing from the outside. Then starting at 1/4 inch in from the side, I'm going to just top stitch across the top there using 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. Stopping 1/8 of an inch away from the second side. Let's just trim off any stray threads. Open the lining out. Using a ruler, mark a line that's 3/8 of an inch, 3/4 of an inch away from the bottom edge of that panel. Take your back card slot, lay it above that mark, matching the sides. Those little tabs on the sides need to match perfectly. Remember, you'll be 1/8 of an inch away from that top corner. then stitch across the bottom using an 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. Now if you go bigger than an 1/8 of an inch, you'll find that your cards will poke out of the top of the card slots, and that's not what you want. So an 1/8 of an inch, or if you dare, go a little bit less on this one. I wonder sometimes if I'm not actually doing perhaps a 1/16 of an inch, but an 1/8 of an inch is what the maths tells me to do. So, but no bigger than an 1/8 of an inch, that's definite, that's for absolute sure. So our next line, 1/4 inch away from the bottom edge, take our centre card slot, lay it on top of that line, matching up these little tabs at the sides. And then we're going to stitch across the bottom of that one using that same 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. Back stitching. Just one or two stitches at the beginning and the end to secure our threads. And then in the same way as I did before, I'm just going to kind of lay that one on there so that I don't lose it. It does help when you've got lots of card slots and stuff like that to kind of keep everything together. So just pop it on, and now I have 2 sets of card slots. They're exactly the same, but they will actually be opposing when they go into the wallet together. So I'm just going to go grab my lining pieces and we'll look at how we fit the lining. Okay, so I have my back lining panel, and I'm just going to take those front bits off of there because I don't need them on at this point, but I'm always concerned when I'm jiggery pokering around that I'm going to lose things. So what we're going to do is we're going to open up one of our panels and put the lining so that it's sticking out at the top. I'm just going to clip the card slot in. And I'm going to take that lining panel and I'm going to lay it right sides together with one end of the back lining, matching up the corners perfectly. So my card slots are kind of out of the way. I'm just going to match up those sides. It's really important that you get this matched perfectly. I'm just going to clip the card slot bits to the lining so that I know it's nice and straight. Now what we're going to do is we are going to stitch down here along the bottom and up here, but we're going to start about 1/4 of an inch away from that sort of folded seam that you've created. So just below it, coming down, along and back up. We're going to use a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Come down the side, and coming along the bottom, and if you're not sure that you can do a 1/4 inch seam allowance, mark it on with a Fix-On pen or something like that to make sure that you've got an exact 1/4 inch seam allowance. Threads. Now at the sides I'm going to trim away the seam allowance back down to about 1/8 of an inch. Do not cut through your faux leather. You can kind of angle it out towards the top there, and these little bits here on the corners at the top here, you can trim those off as well. So coming in from the side, just making sure that you don't catch the faux leather. Now you can see there that I've kind of brought it in from the top, and I've taken those corners off as well, just because we don't need those. Got a couple of little extra bits there that can come off. So that's one of our linings completed, and we can just turn our card slots back out the right way and just pop a clip in to keep them where they need to be. Otherwise, because they're not attached to the side, they tend to flap about a bit, which is a bit disconcerting because you don't know what they're doing. So that's one lot of card slots fitted. We're going to do exactly the same with the second lot of card slots. So we're going to open up that lining. We're going to lay the lining right sides together with the back lining, matching up those bottom corners absolutely perfectly. I'm just going to straighten the card slots up so that they sit perfectly on top of the previous ones that we've already put in, so that I know that everything's straight. And then I'm going to do the same thing again. I'm going to start 1/4 of an inch down from that folded seam that we've got. I'm going to stitch down, across and up again, using a 1/4 inch seam allowance. I'm going to just do the same thing as I did last time. I'm going to trim off the corners there, and then I'm going to just curving it in, take off the seam allowance on the side of those pocket linings. Making sure that I don't cut into my faux leather. And I can unclip my card slots, and now I have my card slots sitting there nicely. I'm just going to clip those at the sides to make sure they don't flap about. And you can see we now have nice little pockets underneath each side. I have got some threads that I do need to get rid of. And everything is looking beautiful. So I'm going to go and grab my main exterior panel and some glue, and I'll show you how we put this together. Okay, so I now have my front panel and my main exterior panel, and what I've done is I've matched up the corners on each end and I've clipped them. Still got a clip in there with the side of the card slots. I'm just kind of pushing everything down so that I make sure that it fits perfectly, and it does. And now I'm going to take my, obviously they're wrong sides together, so the card slots are on the inside and the main fabric is on the outside. I'm now going to take my front card slots, and I'm just going to lay those on, matching up those corners. This does take a little bit of patience, and it's worth just taking the time to make sure that everything is matched. Use as many clips as you need. Remember, faux leather is actually quite does have a little bit of stretch to it, so if you need to just kind of manipulate it with your fingers, you can do, just to make sure that all of the sides and the card slots and everything else matches. Let's just find more clips. Don't worry about those little flaps at the moment. It's more important that you get everything lined up along the edges. And I'm worried about when you've got big clips when I want little clips. So I'm going to take the second card slot and put it on the other side, the second front card slot, should I say. Again, making sure all of those corners sit together. And all the card slots are sitting nicely. No such thing as too many clips. There we go. So there we have all of our card slots. Everything's attached and I've got a lot of clips on there. Now I'm just going to put a little drop of glue onto those little flaps at the side. And ideally you want that to go sort of right up to the edge, the outside edge if you can. Doesn't have to be a lot of glue. You don't want masses of glue because it will just squirt out the sides and that's not something you want. I'm just going to push the lining down and fold that flap in. And clip it. So it's now clipped over the top of my lining panel. I'm going to do exactly the same on the other side. And clip. Now everything is sitting, it's clipped to within an inch of its life, but everything is sitting where it needs to. So now I'm going to top stitch around the outside. Let's just get my thread out. Now this is where my awl comes into play, because this helps me, it helps me tuck the ends of my threads in, which seem to have gone a bit doolally. I've got a bit there that's going to annoy me. But B, it helps me to kind of keep everything where I want it to be. So if I've got anything that seems to have moved a little bit, I can just use the point of my awl to just kind of hold it in place. So I'm just going to lower my foot. Let's get rid of that clip because I don't need that one in there. And I'm going to top stitch around the outside, doing one back stitch to secure my threads at the beginning of my stitching. I'm using an 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. I'm going really slowly and I'm holding my faux leather with my awl to make sure that it doesn't move once I've taken my clip out. sometimes when you take the clip out, the whole thing wiggles. But this is just like an extra finger that I can use. I'm just going to hand crank down into that corner to make sure that I'm actually in a position that I'm happy with in the corner, so I can come along the bottom here using the 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. Again, holding it with my awl as opposed to my fingers because it's quite close to the edge. Now, if you're going to struggle with this, what you can do is take a spare piece of faux leather. Let me just cut a piece of faux leather. This has got stitching on it. I think I was using it to try something, so let's just get rid of the threads off of it. You can fold it in half or in thirds, and you can kind of stick it under the other side of your foot. Sometimes if you've got a really wide foot, you find that the foot almost feels like it's falling off the edge if you're doing 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. So if you just pop a piece of faux leather of a similar thickness to what you're doing underneath the other side of the foot, it'll keep your foot level, means you're less likely to get a skip stitch. Now, because my foot is quite narrow, I don't find I need that, but some machines have very wide feet, and it does feel a bit like your foot's going to fall off the side of the project, which is where you get slightly wonky top stitching. So using something on the other side of the foot, you're not actually stitching over it, and you will need to move it along as you sew, just to keep your foot nice and level. Will help your top stitching around the outside at 1/8 of an inch. If you go too much bigger, you won't get your cards in. So I'm a little concerned my hand's in the way, so you can't actually see what I'm doing. Thread there that I'm just going to tuck underneath using my awl, and that's what the awl's useful for. Just helping to keep everything nice and straight, nice and level. Now, there are no more layers on this than there are on any of the other versions. So, whilst I showed you version 2 on a standard domestic, this is also perfectly achievable on a decent quality domestic. It may be a little much for perhaps your very, very basic entry-level machine. You will need a Teflon foot, or I would say a walking foot, but walking feet are notoriously large, and doing an 1/8 of an inch seam allowance with a walking foot is actually quite difficult. But if you've got a machine with integrated walking foot, that would help. So the IDT system, which I know some FAF machines have, and some Genome machines have. Oops, I just flicked my clip out of the way. Coming back down to where we started from. A couple of back stitches to secure my stitching. Trim off my thread ends. Any threads that you've got that are hanging out the sides. Don't seem to have any. That's not too bad. There's a couple of bits there that are bits off the ends of my card slots, which just need, it's a tiny, tiny little sliver, where I've obviously not cut them terribly accurately. Hey ho. Right, now we have a 3/4 inch gap in the middle of here. So what we're going to do is we're going to mark a line, those 3/8 of an inch from one or t'other of the card slots, so you can see it goes centrally across there. And we're going to top stitch from that outside top stitching that we've just done right the way across the centre to secure the lining in the centre so it doesn't bulge out. So we're going to start at that top stitch line that we've already done. So we're just going to do a line of one back stitch at the beginning. Going all the way across. And one back stitch at the end to secure. And then just wipe my chalk mark off. Get rid of any threads that I've picked up along the way. I can fold that in half, and now your best policy is to pop it under a book overnight, or clip it with some bulldog clips, and you'll find that it will fold perfectly. Now you can use Sharpie along the edges, or you can leave it raw, or you could use edge coat. It's really very much your call. But that's your bifold version 4 completed.